Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Piz. If you're familiar with my channel, I'm sure you've heard me share fond memories of the video store in the past. But I've never gone in depth on what exactly made the video store such a special place for me. And maybe it's one of those you just had to be there kind of things, and I know that quite a few of you watching this weren't there because video stores were either on their way out or already out by the time you were born. And I know that there are still a few operating video stores out there today, but it's just not the same. One of my earliest memories takes place at a video store. I remember its location in the small town I grew up in. I remember where the horror section was off in the corner of the store. I remember sunlight through an adjacent window illuminating all the wonderfully macabre artwork that adorned the video boxes. And I'm not sure what drew me to the horror section. Fate, I'd wager. But there I was, no older than 7 or 8, in complete awe of it all. I remember The Evil Dead 2 with the eyes staring out at me. I remember The Evil Dead with the poor woman being dragged down into the floor. I remember Vamp, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Friday the 13th, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Spookies, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Return of the Living Dead 2, Fright Night 2, The Gates of Hell, Day of the Dead, Chopping Mall. That era of promotional artwork was really the last of its kind. Artwork for physical media releases today pale in comparison. And I remember visiting the video store, Classic Rentals it was called, with my mother and stepfather on a pretty regular basis. It always smelled like popcorn because they were always popping popcorn. There were televisions behind the counter showing promotional reels for upcoming releases. I remember the standees for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 and The Howling 5. Both featured baby cribs, as I recall. There were promotional materials hanging from the ceiling and on the counter, and nearly every inch of wall space was covered by a movie poster. It was sensory overload. But I've jumped ahead. What's the point of renting a video if you didn't have the proper equipment to play it on? When my stepdad brought home our first VCR, I had no idea the world it would open up before me. I even remember the first video we rented for that glorious machine. Throw Mama from the Train. We all gathered in the living room as if it were some big event, because it was, and watched Throw Mama from the Train. Now, when it came to what movies I could rent, they first had to pass inspection. I'd pick a video box off the shelf, take it to my mother, she'd peruse it front and back, and then more often than not, hand it back to me shaking her head, because it had been deemed unsatisfactory. Movies like The Lost Boys and The Monster Squad were approved, and both became regular rentals. All the big horror franchises, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, etc., were strictly off limits. And even long after my mother's parental discretion had waned, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remained on the banned list. I can remember her saying, "I'm not going to let you rent a movie about people being cut up with a chainsaw." And no one show her this video, because that impersonation, although accurate, was not flattering. There's never a time that I can recall my small town not having at least 2 active ma and pa video stores, both cranking out rentals at the same time. My hometown didn't provide its youth with a wide array of productive extracurricular activities. Unless you mean reproductive. So people rented movies, at least enough to keep 2 video stores afloat. As I got a little older, I started going to the video store by myself. I'd walk across town, taking shortcuts through people's backyards, which I don't recommend. One afternoon, I made the mistake of taking a shortcut through the backyard of someone who owned dogs. 2 very large, very mean, and very deadly-looking dogs. Let's just say it was the first time in my life that I feared for my life. Anyway, the video store that was within walking distance of my home was closed on Sundays, so everything that you rented on Saturday, you got to keep an extra day. I took advantage of this many weekends. I'd rent at least 3, sometimes 4 or more videos on a Saturday afternoon, watch one later that afternoon, 2 that night, and the rest the following day, and I'd rewatch whichever one I liked best Sunday night. I can't tell you how many times I rented Halloween 4 and 5 and watched them back to back. I remember renting the original Halloween and then freaking out because I thought I'd rented an edited version. Where's the scene of Loomis meeting with the 2 doctors at the institution? Or the scene where Loomis asks young Michael, "You've fooled them, haven't you, Michael?" I found out later that those scenes were shot for the TV cut, a version of the film that I'd seen dozens of times, having recorded it off of television onto half a dozen different blank tapes. In SLP mode, of course. I can also remember being more than a little bashful about renting only horror movies, particularly if there was a pretty girl working the counter. I still rented them, of course. I just wouldn't look her in the eye when she rang up Slumber Party Massacre. Which reminds me of a funny story. One afternoon, I was walking home from the video store lugging a bag full of rented tapes when a girl I went to high school with pulled up beside me in her car and asked me if I wanted a ride home. On the way home, she asked me what movies I had rented. "Just a couple of horror movies," I sheepishly responded, which was only half true. Yes, I had rented horror movies, but I'd rented far more than just a couple. "Which ones?" she inquired. If I wasn't already sweating, I'm sure I started at this point. Did I mention that this girl was quite attractive, and of the 5 or 6 movies that I had rented, when put on the spot, only one of them came to mind. Slumber Party Massacre. "Well," she said, "you don't have to tell me what that one is about. The title says it all." Pretty sure that was the last conversation we ever had. Still, I remember always having a smile on my face at the video store as a kid. There was something fundamentally thrilling and joyous about it, and not just from renting a video, but from simply being there. It had an energy. I can't describe it any other way. During my late teens and early 20s, I spent an incredible amount of time in the video store. I've talked about this particular video store in the past. If you were a horror fan, then this place was heaven. The store was owned by a horror fan, and his horror section was prodigious, to say the least. And I'm not just talking about your big horror franchises here either. He had it all, from your Friday the 13ths and Halloweens to shot on video in some guy's backyard obscurities. Movies even the IMDb did not have profiles for. It was here that I truly broadened my horror horizons. The store owner, who my friends and I lovingly dubbed the Burnout, had a 3-for-3 policy on old titles. You could rent 3 movies for 3 days for $3. And it wasn't uncommon for my buddies and I to rent 3 movies and watch them all in one night. I remember first seeing Sleepaway Camp during one of these all-nighters. It had already gained classic status because of its wacky characters and dialogue, and then you get that gut punch, or maybe it's a crotch kick of a finale. I remember first discovering movies like The Prowler, Alone in the Dark, Prom Night, Hell Night, Curtains, and so many more during our marathons. If it looked like a slasher, we rented it, but there were some titles my buddies wouldn't go anywhere near. However, I did. Ever hear of gore horror? Yeah, I didn't think so. I saw the good, the bad, and the god-awful the genre had to offer. The Burnout went all out decorating the video store too. There were posters and standees. He had a box from Seven hanging from the ceiling with a tuft of bloody blonde hair sticking out the side. I wanted that thing so bad. Here's where I first saw the poster for Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, a poster that I purchased from him not long after, a poster that hung on my bedroom wall for many, many years. Here I also first laid eyes on the 18-inch NECA Leatherface figure. I had never seen a thing of such beauty in all my life. I remember asking him how much he wanted for it, and the price he quoted me sounded absolutely astronomical at the time. $80. The video store became a hangout, a cool place to socialize with friends and, at the end of the night, take home a movie or two to watch. When a friend who worked at a video store introduced me to the room where they kept screeners, I almost fell over. Here I got to watch the likes of Halloween H2O, long before it officially hit video store shelves. And there's a standee for Dark City you're just gonna throw away? I don't think so. That baby's coming home with me. I miss the social aspect of the video store. Wandering the aisles in search of that hidden gem sure beats scrolling through dozens and dozens of titles with photoshopped artwork on Netflix or Shudder. And if you're like me, you spend far more time scrolling than actually watching something. There's a social component that's missing from watching movies nowadays. Even when it comes to watching a movie at the theater, I used to love going to the movies growing up. Now I practically dread it. Even when it's a movie that I absolutely want to see ASAP, and those are becoming fewer and fewer nowadays, I'm still just like, oh, I gotta go to the theater? Oh, but even then, the window between when a movie is in theaters and when it's available to watch on VOD is what, like a couple of weeks now? A month at the most? There was something about having to wait for a movie to be released on VHS, and then either have your name added to a waitlist or hope that the video store had ordered enough copies to meet the demand, which they seldom did. As was the case with me and Scream. I'd been on the waitlist to rent Scream for what seemed like weeks. Then my day finally arrived, and I showed up at the video store with a big grin on my face, only to have the guy behind the counter inform me that mistakes had been made. A new employee, failing to recognize that there was a waitlist in place, a waitlist that I was currently perched at the top of, had just rented their one and only copy of Scream out to someone literally just minutes ago. The look of broken dreams and crushing defeat on my face must have spoken volumes, because the guy called me at home the very next day to inform me that he was holding that one and only copy for me, but I needed to get there quick. To this very day, I can remember the elation I felt sliding that VHS tape into the VCR. Scream is one of only 2 movies that I watched, rewound, and immediately watched again. The other being The Crow. The immediacy and convenience of having thousands of movies at your fingertips any time of the day or night via the myriad of streaming services available now is great and all, but it's just not the same. The video store became a weekly visit for Jeremy and I, too. Every Saturday we'd make our trip there, and Jeremy would diligently and systematically remove each and every VHS box or DVD case from the shelf individually, peruse the front, peruse the back, replace it on the shelf, and then move to the next one. We'd be in there for hours. Jeremy never actually asked to rent anything. He just wanted to go and see what they had on a weekly basis. I remember the point at which I realized that video stores were not much longer for this world. The Burnout first downsized, essentially cutting his store in half, before eventually moving to a much smaller location. He began selling off his VHSs and was pretty much just renting DVDs toward the end, and it was a pretty grim selection. But it was the horror section. Seeing it winnowed down from its former glory to a few anemic racks, that hurt. At that point, I was renting fewer titles. Soon I was visiting the store less and less often. Then one day I drove by and noticed that the place was closed. The lights in the windows were gone, the sign had been taken down. It was dark and empty inside. Maybe it had been like this for a while and I just hadn't noticed. Either way, the video store was gone. The video store really was a magical place. For those of us who grew up during that era, it's a magic that's tragically been lost forever. For those of you watching this that missed out on that era, it's a magic you'll sadly never know. I hate to end this video on a downer, so I'll share one more fond memory of the video store. As I said, the Burnout was a big horror fan, but he was also a businessman. I remember one customer asking his opinion on a movie and whether or not he should rent it. The movie in question was Uwe Boll's House of the Dead. The Burnout paused for a moment, as if to carefully calculate his response before offering, "It plays good." I had to duck around the corner so the Burnout and the other guy wouldn't see me laughing. It plays good. What the hell does that mean? If you put the tape in your VCR, it'll play? What kind of recommendation is that? But the guy rented it. And I remember thinking that the best case scenario for him is that the tape doesn't play. This video is dedicated to the Burnout. I believe his real name was Tom. Wherever you are, cheers. Please share with me some of your favorite video store memories down in the comments section below. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up and share it on social media. If you're not following me on social media, those links are in the description. As always, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Take care, and until next time, peace. Thank you to all my patrons and channel members. I appreciate your generosity and support of my channel. Become a patron today and have a say in what content appears on my channel. Join me for monthly live streams and much more. Become a channel member today and get access to exclusive badges and emotes to use when I stream. Both those links are in the description. Say hello to the internet, Jeremy.
Hello to the internet.